series of messages looking at how Christ can help us overcome some of the deeper problems of our life. They have not been 5-point how to get victory messages. They've been really deep, thoughtful messages. I'm hoping that challenge us that things just don't go away in life. We've got to work on them with Christ. Today we're going to talk about overcoming the past. Let's begin with prayer. Now, God, as we look at your word, help us to look at ourselves, our self-defeating habits that we have done since we've been young, to memories that haunt us, that do not let us free. In this moment of grace, help us to revel in your love and be refreshed. In Jesus' name, amen. I think all of us know that our past affects our present and our future. Though I think often we are in denial of how much it does that. We know that the past affects how we react to things and how we don't react, our actions and our non-actions. Our past affects what we commit ourselves to and what we decide we're going to reject. Our past affects the sadness that comes upon our lives at times. And then the mysterious joy that also takes place as we sense something or smell something or hear something. And then different emotions take us over. Our past even affects how we talk. Freud often mentioned how we talk about a Freudian slip, how our language betrays what we don't want to say, but it comes out at different times. I don't know how many of you have ever seen the movie Amore, but it's about an older couple where the wife has a disease and she begins to go downhill and begins to get dementia. On one scene, the husband comes home and he finds his wife lying on the floor and he picks her up and he helps walk her over to the bed and sits her on the bed. And then she says, "You better be careful because your image is changing." And he says, "My image is changing." And she says, "Yes." She says, "You're a monster, but you're kind." And you don't know if that's how she always felt about him or whether it's the disease speaking. Cognitive behavioralists tell us that there are certain patterns that happen, that there is a sense of copying the past, so that a person begins to act like they've been treated. You've heard the phrase, right? Abusers abuse, or any of those type of things. But it's not always true, of course. Some people who abuse do not abuse, and some people have never been abused. But there's a pattern of mirroring how we've been treated. If we've been yelled at, we yell back. If we have parents who pout, we pout. We have a tendency to mirror or copy those things. They also talk about two types of learning. Learning helplessness, which I found really interesting about the past. Some people learn, they're so broken on the inside of their being that they don't really feel loved. You can tell them they're loved over and over and over again. But they will do something so that they have to be rescued. And it's only in the rescuing that they feel loved. It's only when you go out of your way to somehow bring them back and help them back on their feet that they feel loved. And so they learn this helplessness. It's not the words that get to them, that you have to prove the love by rescuing them. And others go the opposite route. They're so broken on the inside that they don't learn helplessness, they learn arrogance. And to walk over people and not to trust anybody. Often gang leaders are a part of that type of thinking. Whatever it is, though, they tell us this, those who study human behavior, that our past, all of our past, your past and my past, helps us be very clear in certain areas of our life. We're no matter what type of past you have, there's a clarification that you can see things that other people can't see, and there's major blind spots or things you cannot see that other people see. Your past both clarifies things and blinds you to them. I'm in a book club, and we're studying a book together. It's from Malcolm Gladwell. It's called David and Goliath. It's not a religious book. but it's a human behavior book, and I recommend you to read it. I guess in the fact that it's a human behavior book, it is religious. Guidewell looks at persons and the painful histories that they have, where the seeming odds that are against them, and somehow how certain people have overcome these odds despite their past. And he begins with the story of David and Goliath. And he talks about the real issue of David and Goliath is their past and the colliding of their past. Goliath was brought up to think that this is how you do warfare. You do warfare close up, swords and spears and armor and moving in armor and terrifying people by looming over them, defeating them psychologically before you beat them into the ground with your sword and cut them to pieces. And that's how the ancient world saw warfare. They clashed into each other, hacked each other to pieces. So when Goliath challenges all of Israel for someone great to come out and fight him, that's how they all thought that was their past. But David, whose father really did not like him, who kicked him out of the family to watch the flocks at night, who terrifyingly heard creatures at night threatening the sheep, who had to learn to drive off predators by himself, learned that mobility and distance is how you fight a greater foe. Slingshot at a bear, slingshot at a lion, slingshot at a wolf. And David's past, the hurt of his past, the loneliness in those fields, collides with Goliath's past. And the one who expected to fight hand to hand, close to close, met someone with a different past, and the inevitable defeat took place in Goliath's life. Your past clarifies certain things and blinds in certain areas. David was a great warrior, but his distance and mobility did not make him a good father or a good husband. He was blind in other areas. I've been a pastor for 31 years, and I learned something about people and past. And a lot of people, they try out church, they try out Christ for 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes for a few months. But deep down, what they kind of really want is to be able to say a prayer and have it all disappear. Have all the past, all the pain disappear. And it doesn't work like that. And it never has. And someone ought to tell you the truth. And that's why the story of the woman at the well is such a powerful story. So Jesus is tired. He stops at a well with a great mystery. It's Jacob's well. If you know anything about Jacob, his mother was Rebekah. And Isaac was his father. Isaac's father sent a group of men out to find Isaac a wife. And they traveled great distances, and they stopped by a well. And they meet a woman at the well. And they said, could you please give us something to drink? And she said, well, I'll not only give you a drink, but I'll also give your camels to drink also. So she gives water and food to all of the travelers, and then she waters all the camels. And they're thinking, now that's a woman. That's a woman for Isaac. And they bring her back. Jesus is at the well, and this woman approaches him by herself. Now, there's only 2 reasons why she would come by herself. The first is that she has a family member who's ill, and she has to travel at different times to bring water to this ill family member. But the more likely one is this, is that the other women in the village did not want to be with her. She wasn't welcome. She was a shameful person. So she came by herself at noon at the hottest time to gather water. And Jesus sparks a conversation with her that we are privileged to hear. He says, give me something to drink. The woman is incapable of giving him something to drink. Incapable. She said, how is it that you, a Jew, would speak to me, a Samaritan? She has past prejudices that now begin to dominate her. This passage of Scripture is full of prejudice. Prejudices of the past, prejudices of gender, prejudices of race, prejudices of religion. They're all encumbered in this conversation with Jesus. And she has been taught certain things about Jews. And she knows that Jews have been taught certain things about Samaritans. I'm not going to go into that because prejudice is found all over the world. One of the interesting things that I found when I served in the coal regions, everyone was white. But we had Irish neighborhoods and German neighborhoods and Polish neighborhoods and Lithuanian neighborhoods and English neighborhoods and even fire departments of those ethnicities. And there's histories of a Polish fire department meeting an Irish fire department, and they fought each other and let the house burn. We know how to be prejudiced. And we know how to be gender-wise and religious-wise. We know how to be bigoted. But the thing about prejudice, and we teach it, and here we have to be very careful how we talk about people and how we treat people. Because when we talk about people in a certain way, we hinder what we're willing to do with them eventually. Or we can give us the permission to be violent towards them. I have a friend who's a United Methodist pastor, and she's Latino. She's been an American citizen now for over 15 years. And she tells a story that she drove into a Burger King, not this Burger King, but another Burger King. She was walking and she was talking to her husband, who also was born an American citizen, but also Latino. And they were speaking in Spanish to one another over the phone. When she got to the door, there was an older woman in front of her, and she opened the door for her, I guess, her grandchildren. And then when she saw my friend coming, she closed the door on my friend. And my friend opened the door and followed her in and stood behind her. And she heard her speaking in Spanish, and turned around and she said, "Why don't you go back where you came from? Quit taking American jobs, and why is it that you don't learn English?" Now, this woman speaks perfect English, by the way. She's stunned. She's stunned. And she said, she came to my office, she was telling me this, and she said, "I sat in the parking lot for an hour, unable to drive. And I kept saying to my husband, how long do you have to be a citizen of this country so someone accepts you as a citizen?" The woman could open a door for her or be kind to her, and there was a violence in that. Do you hear it? There's a violence in that. How is it that you, being a Jew, would talk to one water and me a people? She was unable to give him a drink. Now, it's interesting how Jesus responds to her with this. He responds to her not defensively. He says, "Woman, if you knew the gift of God who's talking to you right now, you would ask me for a drink of water, and I would give you living water." The thing I love about Jesus is this. He wants to give you everything he has. He's the Son of God. He wants you to be a child of God. Everything that he has, he wants for you. He didn't get drawn into her prejudice. Please understand that when we meet someone, we either honor their sacredness and their humanity, or we drive them down to the dirt. Want for another person what you want for yourself. That was the heart of Christ as he enters into this. Well, she begins to look at him, and she becomes cynical, the way Nicodemus was cynical last week. And she says, "Well, how is it? I mean, you must be a really bright man here, considering you traveled to a well and you didn't bring your own bucket." Can you hear the cynicism in that? I mean, what kind of, you're not very smart, are you? You're telling me you have living water. So Jesus breaks through the cynicism by asking her a question. He says, "Well, I'll give you living water, but before I give you living water, go and get your husband." And she stops for a moment. She says, "Well, I have no husband." And he says, "Well, I know that you have no husband. You've had 5 husbands, and the man you're living with now is not your husband. You certainly have answered correctly that you have no husband." And she's stunned by that, but apparently not in a defensive way. "I perceive you are a prophet." Maybe a little cynicism. I had a professor when I was in college. His name was Professor Hartwig. He loved to be called Brother Hartwig. He was a professor of philosophy and theology. And I remember him saying to us is this. He says, "When you're pastors," he said, "we often tell, the congregation knows that Jesus came to save them from their sins. But he says, what they often don't know is he also came to help them overcome their sorrows." Sins are the things that we do that hurt ourselves and others, But sorrows are the things that happen to us. Life that happens to us, that breaks in on us. Sins and sorrows. And you hear both of those in those words, do you not? 5 husbands and the one you're living with is not your husband. Doesn't necessarily mean, by the way, she was a rotten wife. No one could live with her. In the ancient world, the life expectancy was very, very low. And so if a husband died, a brother had to marry the wife in order to bring her in. It could have been she was in an entirely ill family. And finally, in desperation, she ended up being with a man out of convenience just to survive. The other thing Brother Harper used to say to me is never forget God has a tender heart for survivors. I love that. God has a tender heart for survivors. You read the Bible and you know that is true. This woman is a survivor. Sure, you hear sin in it. And Christ wants us to overcome the sin. Not just to forgive it, but to overcome it. To face it. And that's a lifelong work. Understanding why we react the way we do. Why we're attracted to what we're attracted to. What we do when we do it. That's a lifelong work that needs to be in the grace of Christ and with people that we trust. And it's in the Gospel of John, Peter, who denies Jesus 3 times. At the very end of the Gospel, you remember how Jesus meets him and says to him 3 times. So Peter faces him. Do you love me, Peter, for the first denial? Do you love me, Peter, for the second denial? Do you love me, Peter, on the third denial? Making Peter face it. So he knows that he's forgiven, but he also can't just do it again. Do you love me, Peter? Can we work together on this? It's a lifelong work in overcoming that. And we need to be in it in a lifelong fellowship of grace with one another. But sorrows is something we don't often talk about. And this, you can hear sorrow all through this woman's voice, can you not? And in this story, pain of being used and passed on, and life limiting her. There's no other career she could be in the world but a wife. Life had inflicted itself upon her. Sorrows. And Jesus so wanted to overcome her sorrows. I came upon a story, and it was written by Alice Walker. Now, Alice Walker is a Pulitzer Prize winner. When she was 8 years old, she was shot in the eye with a BB. It scarred her eye greatly. It blinded her permanently. And she was just a vivacious, lovely girl. And then when the BB hit, she said for 6 long years she never looked another human being in the face. She didn't want anybody to see the ugliness of her eye. She felt ugly, inside and out. And kids would make fun of her because her head was down, call her names about her eye. When she was age 14, she met a plastic surgeon who corrected much of the scarring around the eye and then did an implant of an artificial eye. And she said that healed a little bit, but she still couldn't look anybody in the face. And eventually she had a child. The thing she dreaded most with her child was that one day her child would look at her and say, "Mom, why is your other eye so ugly?" She said her daughter was 3 years old and she watched a television show called The Blue Marble, which was about the Earth from space. It was a science show for children. She said she put her child down for a nap that afternoon, and as she looked down, she kissed her. And her child grabbed her by the face and stared at her. She thought, "Oh, no, here it is." And her daughter looked at